Greetings sailors and welcome back to World of Warships and a work in progress ship. I haven't done a look at one of these for a while. I tend to avoid it a bit anyway because they are of course subject to change. But in this video I want to talk less about the ship itself and more about two of the unique Italian cruiser characteristics. The first being the semi-armour piercing shells, and the second being the high-speed smoke, both of which you will get to see in action in this particular video. It's also been helped, I have to say, by the fact that we have fewer ships for testing this time round. It's a couple of Italian cruisers and tier 10 Italian rewards destroyer of some kind. You can always tell the rewards or premium ships because they come with a perma camo, whereas the regular testing ships do not, like this one. And there's also the Ohio again and Thunderer, but all in all it's not quite as overwhelming a number of ships as we've had to look at previously, so I might actually be able to devote a bit more attention to individual ships. And also I think just generally this lot of ships seems a bit more interesting to me than the last lot of ships we had for testing anyway. So this is the Raimundo Montecuccoli, which is in fact a Condottieri class cruiser, just as the Duca d'Aosta and the Abruzzi are as well. And although all three of them look rather different, it's basically a line of cruisers that, or a class of cruisers that kind of evolved in design as they went along. It's a little bit like the Royal Navy's various subclasses, like how, for instance, we have the Town class being represented by the Edinburgh, and called the Edinburgh because it was the lead ship of the Edinburgh subclass of Town class cruisers. But unlike, say, the differences between various subclasses of Town class cruiser, there's rather more differences between the different, the 5 different subtypes of Condottieri class. And we've actually, as I said, we've got 2 of them in game already, and they are, I think, so far the later classes. I think the Duca d'Aosta subclass was 2 ships that came after the 2 ships of the Montecuccoli class, and then after that was the Abruzzi class, which were the final subclass. So there's a possibility we might get to see the first 2 subclasses as well. But I mean, generally speaking, they all seem to be similar in terms of armament. It's just the actual the profile of the ships seems a bit different. But this obviously is a tier 5 as well, so it's a little bit different than the Duca d'Aosta. But I think the main thing that sets it apart really is the fact that this has the semi-armour piercing, and of course the Duca d'Aosta has the regular HE, as does Abruzzi. And it's particularly anemic HE, which kind of makes the SAP rather welcome, because it's a little bit like the Royal Navy AP in that it sort of acts. Well, it is and it isn't. It has kind of better pen angles. It's not really AP shells, but it kind of semi-acts as HE ammunition, but it doesn't have a chance to set any fires. So you might almost think of it as high penetration HE ammunition even that can't set fires. Now it might be subject to tweaking because we don't have it actually anywhere else. You know, we don't have it on any premiums or anything in the game already. It is just on these test ships so far, and it's also on the tier 5 heavy cruiser they've given us for testing as well, which I can't actually Genova, there we go. There's basically 203mm guns, but also with semi-armour piercing. But it doesn't have the smoke, interestingly. I'm not quite sure Genova is up to snuff at the moment. But yeah, the SAP is certainly, at the moment anyway, the go-to shell, especially with the 6-inch guns. And that makes it, I think, a rather more fun experience than the existing Italian premiums, which are nice and fast, as this is. This is 37 knots at the moment, without the benefit of the Sierra Mike flag. With it you can get to nearly 39 knots, which is quite fast for a Tier 5 cruiser. I think that easily makes it the fastest Tier 5 cruiser. And overall, you combine that with the SAP, that makes it quite a fun ship to play, at least sometimes. Now, this is a top tier game. You've already seen me spanking some destroyers. This 6-inch SAP is very good against destroyers. It's also very good against any kind of squashy target, and there are a lot of those around at the mid tiers. This is, by the way, my second match in this. The first match was in a Tier 7 game, and that really highlighted to me the downsides of the semi-armour piercing, because like the British cruisers, you can't set fires except via any secondary guns that you may or may not have. And that presents a major disadvantage against battleships. You can still get some nice chunks of damage out of battleships, especially if you're going for superstructures. And with the Genova, with the 8-inch guns, I found myself swapping back and forth between the SAP and the AP shells against broadside targets. The 8-inch SAP didn't seem as reliable for getting citadels as the AP did. And I've not tried the Tier 10 yet. There is a Tier 10 for us to test as well, the Venezia. But in this ship, yeah, it is just SAP all the way. And although it's fine for, like, against targets like this, as I say, lightly armoured targets, it's fine for taking really nice chunks of damage off them. Against battleships, you're having to hit the superstructure, you're having to hit the weaker areas, and it's just a little bit at a time. And so you kind of almost, like, you're a predator when it comes to weakly armoured cruisers, when it comes to especially destroyers, but when it comes to battleships, you are very much more in the role of a secondary support ship, just taking a little bit of damage here and a little bit of damage there. Unfortunately, the range of this is fairly decent. The range of the Genova is, by contrast, really bad. It's the worst at Tier 5. I might try and do a video on the Genova if I can get a decent game in it. But I almost found this ship a lot better than the Genova, even though it's smaller caliber guns, just because it's got the better rate of fire. Genova's rate of fire was almost 20 seconds. In fact, it might be 20 seconds flat. I think it is. It's got the shortest range and a really long reload. It's a bit of an awkward combination. 13 kilometers range when you're down tiered in a Tier 5 cruiser is pretty bad. But anyway, I mean, this was just a good game overall for this ship, just because it was mostly me firing at the squashier targets, and the only hard target I have to deal with, that New York, is going to turn out to be really not a threat to me at all. So between my speed and my semi-armour piercing shells, and you can see here I'm using my high-speed smoke to just temporarily break line of sight to the New York until I could get some island cover between me and them, because at this point I didn't know the New York wasn't a threat. You'll see why they weren't a threat very shortly. The combination of the speed and the rate of fire and everything and the SAP shells meant that although I've not done a huge amount of damage, I've smacked around some very lightly armoured targets quite nicely. Whether that will remain to be true, you know, whether they'll feel as effective at higher tiers, definitely remains to be seen. We don't have a full line to test or anything like that. I would be especially interested to see how they would perform at, say, Tier 8, or whether there's even going to be a light cruiser at Tier 8. I don't know what the line progression will be like exactly. But it's made for a very pleasant experience, at least in this particular game. And maybe I could have interspersed or showed you a bit of the first game with it being Tier 7s. But it honestly wasn't that much of an interesting game. I was able to, just because I've got an okay range, a pretty decent range for a Tier 5 cruiser, and it does have the option of a spotter plane, by the way, but I don't think you really need it. The Genova badly does, but I don't think this particularly needs the spotter plane. But the speed of it and the overall quite decent manoeuvrability and that ability to lay essentially getaway smoke. You can't really sit in it and do much else with it just because it's such short duration, but it's very good for, you know, if you've got 5 or 6 people suddenly aiming at you, it's very good for breaking contact and running away at full speed as you go. So yeah, it's just a nice combination when you're top tier, when you've got a lot of squashy targets, but you're going to now see how well it performs against the New York, and it's not bad, but in any other light cruiser barring the Emerald, which this absolutely knocks into a cocked hat, it really does. This might even be subject to nerfs, honestly. It feels a bit too potent at the moment. I hope they don't nerf it too badly because it is quite fun, but if it's overperforming, then it's overperforming. But yeah, I mean, this is more than I would be able to do in the Emerald against this New York. But it's still, you know, the fact I can't set fires is still basically slowing this engagement down, as far as I'm concerned, quite a bit. There's no possibility of me burning this New York out and getting them to die that bit quicker. It's purely the damage output of these SAP shells. And against a battleship's health pool, I mean, doing, you know, between 1.5, 3,000, 4,000, whatever, with a lucky hit per salvo is not nothing, but it's going to take you a while. It's definitely going to take you a while. And there are torpedoes. You've seen me try to drop torps. It's 10-kilometer torps with 51 knots, which I think is what the Duca d'Aosta has as well. And it's only a double launcher versus the triple launcher on the Duca. So, you know, it's a useful range, but it's not exactly a lot of extra hitting power in terms of trying to pin a flooding on somebody, which is the only realistic way that you're usually going to be able to get any damage ticks going on people. So I'm keeping my range a bit, but I don't know if I need to, really. This New York's just single-firing HE rounds at me. Or single-firing their turrets one at a time at me. So, yeah, it's not even like it's full volleys of HE that I have to dodge here. I maybe didn't even need to back off this much. I maybe didn't need to be this cautious. I quite possibly could have just run down the New York and tried to torpedo them. I mean, there is the Koenig that's in range as well. They're a bit of an unknown quantity, but whilst this looked a bit dicey to begin with, and I did originally come over on this side just to basically forestall anybody trying to make a run on our carriers, I then had the thought of, well, why don't I just press forwards and maybe see if I can't relieve some of the pressure on my team on the other flank, which is where most of each team was concentrating. And it seems to have done the trick, and I don't know if it really would have made any difference if I'd, having killed that Shenyang that was trying to go for the carriers, if I'd then just turned back around and pummeled the enemies from the other side. But I suspect I have ended up with more damage than I would have otherwise, just because I've been able to take a crack at the enemy carriers in the process, which the SAP is really, really good for. I've not had any citadels on these carriers, and maybe the AP would have given me a better results in that regard, but in terms of firing against angled targets, the SAP is undoubtedly superior, and it just seems to overall almost give better results than British AP, which still has, you know, it's also theoretically semi-armour piercing, but it has not got that kind of HE effect in play. It's basically AP that can pen at better angles, and it's still dangerous against things like destroyers, but I think this ammunition as it stands at the moment is more dangerous against destroyers, definitely, because it doesn't really matter how they're angling. It's not really going to, you know, it might shatter, but it's not going to ricochet unless you hit one of the more armoured areas. So another use of the smoke there, just basically so I can turn around safely. The Genova doesn't have this smoke, and I don't know why. I'm not entirely sure why they've left it off. It's basically just a repair party and either a catapult plane or a spotter, and you're pretty much going to want to take the spotter in the Genova. 13.1 or whatever it is kilometers range is it's bad. It's really bad in a tier 5 cruiser, especially when the concealment is not exactly amazing. And that does seem like one thing where the British cruisers will definitely retain the advantage, is the surface detection. And obviously they have smoke to work with as well, whereas these are absolutely relying on their speed to keep them out of trouble. So this is just about done. I'm going to see if I can finish off the Omaha. This isn't with the... I can't remember what it's called now, but the module that gives you the increased main battery accuracy. I put the AA gun mod on instead. I don't think it makes a huge difference. I mean, I've shot down some planes, some with the fighters, but most with my AA, which has actually performed okay against the tier 4 carriers, but against, you know, tier 6 carriers, I suspect it wouldn't really do nearly so well. You're more relying on your maneuverability to keep you alive. But yeah, the accuracy overall, I mean, the shell groupings, sometimes they're nice and tight, but other times, and quite a lot of times, they seem a bit, I don't know, I think you're going to want to go for as much accuracy with this as you can, because it's not like you've got a super quick rate of fire or anything like that. And especially when dealing with this with destroyers. I mean, I can see actually maybe why they've done it that way. It would make it a bit too unfair against destroyers if you had, say, Soviet 6-inch gun accuracy and you were pumping out these shells. But yeah, it can be a bit frustrating sometimes when you splash all around a destroyer. You've got the lead just right, but you can't actually manage to land any hits because RNG says no. So that was not that far off, 100,000 damage done, and top of the team. You can see there, break down the damage. It was a bit everywhere. A considerable top up from both the Langley and the Hermes to my damage total. But yeah, for the most part, I feel even if I hadn't done that, this would have been a fairly decent demonstration of both the SAP and the high-speed smoke. And if it comes out pretty much like it is, I think this one will end up being one of my favourite tier 5 cruisers. I mean, it's still squashy, but the combination of decent range, fast speed and reasonable manoeuvrability certainly gives it, and plus that smoke as well, it gives it a good toolbox for staying alive when you get down tiered, unlike some of the other tier 5 cruisers, which do not get treated kindly by down tiers at all. Especially the likes of, you know, the Omaha and the Emeralds. Poor old Emerald. And the Fur Attacker a bit as well. The Fur Attacker, it's more the range than anything else. It doesn't have a particularly fast rate of fire either, but yeah. It can work well, but when you're fully down tiered, yeah, it can be a bit of a struggle. So that's a very quick first impression of both the Montecuccoli and the SAP and the high-speed smoke as well. I will put a bit of time into testing this line, I think. They do look interesting for cruisers, and hopefully once we get our hands on some of the higher tier regular line ships, I'll be able to see if that trend continues all the way through. So hopefully you have enjoyed this game, and if you have, you can do all the usual things down underneath the video, and of course, as always, stay tuned for more.